What's up, guys? This is Settle the Score from 98.1. My name's Hayden. Once again, we got our co-host Justin, and we got special guest Mark Persky on again, once again. So we're going to be talking about the best teams to never win a championship to start off. So I'm going to give a few teams in each sport, and we're going to kind of debate about it. So what do you guys think of who's the best team to never win a championship in each sport?
Personally, I think the 16-0 Patriots, just given the success they had throughout the entire year, and everyone thought they were invincible, and a 10-6 wildcard team, Giants, like no one thought they really could stand a chance. They limited Brady by collapsing in the pocket and not making him feel uncomfortable, not being able to make easy throws. And I just think pulling that off was one of the most sensational wins I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, this is going to sound like I agree with Justin, but I mean, the Warriors just that year when they blew that 3-1 lead to the Cavs, I mean, they demonstrated true greatness, what greatness is all about, right? I mean, just straight dominance. And yeah, they won, multiple championships before and after the fact. But that being said, they were 73-9 and, they had the season of a lifetime. I mean, if you think about a sport that has 82 games, whether it's hockey or basketball, right? And they were just so dominant. I mean, it was hard to
Well, it's the greatest regular season ever.
Yeah. And that NBA Finals might have been the greatest NBA Finals I think I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, just alone because it went 7 games and it had drama back and forth. So I don't know. I think the Warriors not being able to close that out with that kind of record, I mean, I think that's probably the greatest team because they won 73 games. I mean, we're probably never going to see the likes of that ever again.
So I'm going to give my top 4 teams to never win a championship. In the MLB, we're going to go the 2004 St. Louis Cardinals when they won 105 games and lost to the Boston Red Sox was a huge one, actually. That was one of the greatest teams I ever saw with Albert Pujols. They were a tremendous team that year. What everyone doesn't realize is that when the Boston Red Sox beat the Yankees won 102 games. So they were an incredibly good team as well. But they had to go face a team after in the St. Louis Cardinals that won 105 games. They were a massive underdog even in that World Series. And just be able to sweep them was unbelievable. So that's one team I would consider for the MLB. The NFL, you have to go with the 2007 New England Patriots. That's the greatest team ever probably in the history of the game. If they win that game versus the New York Giants, that's the greatest team in the history of football. They had Randy Moss, they had Wes Welker, they had Tom Brady. Tom Brady threw for 50 touchdowns, and Randy Moss had 23 that year. So that was an incredible team. And, yeah, like I said, the best team, again, once again you brought up in the NBA, got to be the Golden State Warriors when they went 7-3-9. They had Curry. They had Klay Thompson. They had basically every piece that you needed to win a championship. And the fact that the Cleveland Cavaliers came back from 3-1 was an unbelievable feat to really win that game. And one other honorable mention I'd like to give for the NBA was last year when the Golden State Warriors actually defeated the Houston Rockets in that series. Houston Rockets won 67 games that year and was probably the greatest shooting team I ever saw personally. So that was another honorable mention I'd like to give in the NBA when they had James Harden and they had James Harden with Mike D'Antoni in that system. They won 67 games that year and they were an incredibly good team. So that's a team I think people kind of forget about. We're talking about greatest teams to never win a World Series, NBA championship, I meant. But that's another team I'd like to look out for. So what do you guys think about the NHL? What are some great teams, that didn't win the championship in the NHL?
I mean, I think you got to point to the Lightning last year. I mean, they had a record-setting year. They had, the most points by far in the past, 10 years. They had, the disparity between them and the next best team for points was, insurmountable for any other team to actually beat them. And the fact that they got swept and didn't even win one game is, beyond something.
Yes, but you also have to think about it. If they were such a great team, how come they couldn't even win a game in the first round? If they were such a great team, I 100% do not believe that result would have happened.
They were loaded top to bottom. It's crazy to think. I don't know how.
That's why I would not put them amongst the top teams that didn't win because they didn't make it that far. You can't if you don't win a game in the playoffs, you're obviously not that great of a team if you didn't win a game, no matter what the regular season says.
I mean, that's fair.
I think one team you guys are missing, and this goes a decade back, is the early days of Alex Ovechkin. I think Alex Ovechkin's sheer talent, that dude is going not only probably is going to break Gretzky's record because of the pace that he goes every year of scoring 50 goals, and obviously this year, the season, came to a halt. But I think the early years of the Washington Capitals, when Alex Ovechkin was 23, 24, 25 years old, and they were winning 55 games, winning divisions, winning President's Trophy.
Well, they always ran into the Pittsburgh Penguins. That was
not
the
even
thing.
that. They'd have some first-round exits against the Canadiens. They had a tough loss against the Flyers. They had some bad Game 7 losses on their own home ice, where they just simply, collapsed. And even to the extent against the Rangers. I mean, in the early years, they had the upper hand on the Rangers, where they would – the first time the Capitals ever played the Rangers in the playoffs in the Alex Ovechkin era, the Rangers took them to 7 games. And that was a dogfight to the end. The Rangers got the early edge, and then they came back, and Alex Ovechkin, just out-muscled and out-willed everybody and just showed how great he really is. But, yes, they did run into the Penguins a couple times in the second round. But overall, the Capitals in the early years, where they had a ton of points because Ovechkin can just really just score at any given second when he was on the ice in the offensive zone. I mean, those teams were absolutely dominant. And again, Ovi was a little inexperienced, so on and so forth. But those early years, if you would have, told me that, the Capitals weren't winning the Stanley Cup because of the regular seasons they were having in like 2009, 2010, 2011, I would have said you're crazy, because Ovi, I mean, that's where he started. I mean, that's where he really got his reputation.
All right, if I had to pick one best team, I think this is going to be a team I think people kind of forget about them a little bit, but I'm going to pick the Vancouver Canucks when they lost to Boston in that series, when they had a 3-1 lead. I think that's one of the greatest teams that people always forget about in the NHL, with the Sedin brothers and Luongo. I think that's a team that didn't win the championship. That would be one of my picks in terms of the best team to never win in the NHL.
Yeah, I think that loss to Boston was probably really heartbreaking, and obviously.
Oh, they literally had like riots in the city. They were like burning down things. They were flipping over cars. That loss to Boston was such a brutal. It set back the franchise almost 10 years after the loss, because they have not been the same since that game.
Well, yeah, they've got a couple of first round draft picks. They've got Quinn Hughes is there, and he played college hockey. Or maybe he didn't play college hockey, but he was a top pick. They've had a couple other top picks over the last couple of years, but no, they haven't made it back past the first round, I don't think.
But that's the best team that I remember not winning a championship in the NHL. That's what I've ever seen with the Sedins and Luongo.
You could pretty much argue, I think, that if a team in East, West, doesn't matter, if they can get it to 7 games in a Stanley Cup final, it's pretty hard to argue that team, probably was the greatest team that franchise has produced in a long while, because as you guys probably know, in hockey, it's really hard to get back to the championship. It's almost
almost impossible. Yes. I would say in the NHL, it's probably the hardest to go back in any other sport.
Yeah.
I think the last time I remember, the Penguins and the Red Wings did it. That was the last 2 teams. But other than that, there hasn't been too many.
And if you look at both of those teams, it really makes sense why they'd get there, right? Because the Red Wings have had like amazing talent in the past, and then
they had the defenseman, the Red Wings.
They've had Cromwell. They've had Lidstrom.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah, they've had really great players, but they get back there for a reason. But yeah, I agree. Vancouver, there's a lot of teams. Like I said, if you can get a Game 7 Stanley Cup final, like that's a great team. Like, and no matter who comes out winning, like that, even the losing team, like that's probably one of the greatest teams assembled for that franchise.
That's what I'm saying about about these great teams that never win. If you're the greatest team ever, it's not like you're playing one game. Okay, one game I understand. But if you lose a series 4 games in a row to another team and you score 128 points, something can't get off. You can't be that bad 4 games in a row to really prove that you're a good team. Because I understand the idea that teams can have a bad game. Like, I understand that. You see the Baltimore Ravens this year, they were 14-2. They had 1 bad game, they lost. But if you're going to lose a whole series like that, it probably means your team isn't that good.
Yeah.
Like in the first round, it's not even like they made it to the championship game. Another example was the 2007 Dallas Mavericks when they won 67 games. And they lost in the first round to the Warriors. Obviously, that team wasn't that great if they lost 4 games in a series to Warriors. That's what I think. That's why I think you can't really pick a team that loses in the first round. It kind of defeats the purpose.
Well, to Justin's point, though, the Lightning, that team was loaded. Like Stamkos, they had all the ex-Rangers when they went to the Stanley Cup final and all the Eastern Conference finals. They were loaded. But they ran into a team that just didn't quit. The Columbus Blue Jackets just didn't quit, and they outmuscled the Lightning in every aspect, and they got rocked, right? I mean, they really got rocked. So, I mean, just because you have a great regular season doesn't always translate to the playoffs, and I think that's probably the lesson learned, at least from the Lightning, probably.
I think if you're not looking for this question, if we're not looking for like a specific year, the Rangers, like those years throughout like 2011 to 2015, or like one of those best.
Well,
teams.
they won the President's Cup. They won the President's Trophy, and then they lost to Lightning in Game 7.
But the thing with that is that's a curse in the NHL. That's a hoax. Like if you get that, you look at the track record. I guarantee you, if you Wikipedia this, when was the last time a team that won the President's Trophy won the Stanley Cup? You're going to have a hard time finding a match.
I believe the Chicago Blackhawks won the President's Trophy one year and then won a cup.
Maybe that was in 2010.
Yeah, one of those years. The Blackhawks
Other
did.
than that, you're going to have a really hard time because in the NHL, it's crazy because anybody who gets in has a chance. And that's one of the great things about the Stanley Cup playoffs is that it doesn't matter where you get in. It just matters.
Two sports I can think of the most where literally anyone could win. Like the Mets in the 2015, no one thought they could actually win.
Yeah.
Hot at the right time.
Right. Yeah. And that's what sports comes down to, right? I mean, if you get hot at the right time, you're in good shape.
Yeah. When the Giants beat the Patriots in 2011, they were 9-7, and they won all the way to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Exactly. That I completely agree. That it doesn't matter like what your record is in the regular season. If you can just get in, like anything's possible, I think.
So next question we're going to cover in our radio show is who do you think is more valuable to the New York Yankees dynasty, Mariano Rivera or Derek Jeter? And tell me why.
For me, it's definitely Derek Jeter. I mean, it's not that much of a for me personally, it's not that much of a question because when you think of Mo, you mainly think of the ninth inning and that one inning. And I know he was arguably the best closer of all time. But you solely when you think of Mariano Rivera, you mainly think of just the ninth inning. But Derek Jeter, what he represented for the Yankees and just baseball all around. I think he represented so much to baseball and the Yankees, much more than Mariano Rivera. That's just what I think.
Yeah, I agree with Justin. I think Mariano Rivera, I mean, he's probably one of the greatest closers of all time. I think it's hard.
He's the greatest. He's so far and away the greatest.
Yeah, well, I mean, he won all those championships, so it really speaks for itself. But, like, I don't know. Like, I think it's hard to argue against Derek Jeter. I think Derek Jeter is, he's Mr. November. He was Mr. Yankee for how many years? Like 20 years, 20 plus years.
Yep.
It's like, it's hard to argue that for a guy who played day in and day out and you always knew what you were going to get from him, which was 110%. And there's so many memorable highlight moments of his career. It's really hard to argue that. At least from my standpoint, I think that Derek Jeter.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. I completely disagree with you both. Completely, I couldn't disagree with you more. Actually, I think Mariano Rivera is a much more valuable piece of that dynasty than Derek Jeter was. 100%. I'm gonna go there with this one. Like you look at what Mariano Rivera did each and every game in which the Yankees played. When he came in, you knew the game was over. There wasn't even a question in your mind the game was over. And that's the difference between the New York Yankees dynasty and the Atlanta Braves dynasty. Because the Atlanta Braves had Tom Glavine. They had Greg Maddux. They had the best pitching staff probably we've ever seen, probably ever have seen since. And they didn't win. They won one World Series in 1995. That's the one World Series they lost. They lost 96 to the Yankees. They lost 99 to the Yankees, and they lost 99 to the Yankees. And you want to know why they lost all those World Series? Because they didn't have the closer. That's why they lost. They didn't lose because they didn't have the position players. They did not lose because they didn't have the pitching. They lost because they didn't have that closer. And Mariano Rivera was so far and away the greatest closer. There's not even a question. When he came in, you knew the game was over. That's the difference between a
Well-
dynasty and another great team is a closer. That's what I really think.
Well-
Steps up to the plate in a clutch moment, you know he's coming through. When it's a ground
It's
ball,
different. I'm going to be honest with you here. It's a little bit different. When Derek Jeter comes up, you know there's a chance maybe he's not going to get the hit. When maybe there's a chance he may not get the hit. Maybe he's not going to produce that moment. You can't really win with necessarily a guy coming up to the plate. And you don't necessarily know when Derek Jeter is coming up to the plate exactly. You know exactly when Mariano Rivera is coming into the game. When you have a one-run lead and you need someone to close the game out, you know when Mariano Rivera is coming in. You don't exactly know when Derek Jeter is coming up to the plate. When Mariano Rivera comes into the plate, you know in the ninth inning, he's going to be the guy that saves the game. He's 100% more of a valuable piece in the Yankees dynasty than Derek Jeter. 100%.
Every time he comes to the mound, you know he's probably going to finish the deal, but you don't know it. He's always going to be in that circumstance. Like Jeter definitely has a part of the first 3 innings and how that could play out before you.
Oh no, I agree with you. But the Yankees dynasty, in my opinion, I'm not gonna say they would have won all those championships, but you can make a case that the Yankees had all these great players that it could have substantially been that if you could take Derek Jeter out and they could have won a couple of championships. You take Mariano Rivera out, I guarantee you they're not winning any. I'm telling you, I think Mariano Rivera is the most important player in the history of the Yankees. I'm gonna go there. I think he's even more important to the Yankees dynasty than I'm not gonna say he was the Babe Ruth. I'm not gonna say he's a Babe Ruth importance, but in my opinion, Mariano Rivera is probably the most important Yankee in the history of the team. I'm gonna even say that. I think Mariano Rivera is an incredibly important piece. Where if they didn't have a closer, they would have never won those championships. I'm telling you. You look at all these great dynasties. You look at even when you look at the Baltimore Orioles in the early 60s and 70s, they were winning 108 games. Did they have the closer? That's why they didn't win these games. Okay? That's what I think. You really, really need the closer specifically in baseball to win the championships. That's what I think is far and away the most important part.
Well, but it also goes back to that age-old argument of how should we build a team, right? So you were talking about the Atlanta Braves, pitching versus hitting. It's an age-old argument. And, it seems to be that hitting is the method to the madness, right, in terms of what creates and ultimately sustains longevity in baseball. Because, if you look at it and I know this is a drastic comparison, but I know Atlanta sealed the deal, at least on one of them. But if you look at Atlanta and compare, Maddox, Smoltz, Glavine to the Mets, to the Mets of modern day where you had Harvey, Syndergaard, Matson, Wheeler, they've only got one World Series appearance. So, if you look at those models and then compare it to the models of the Yankees, the Red Sox, when they won their championships with Ramirez and Ortiz and Garcia Parra, right, and all those other players they had, I think hitting probably, outlasts pitching for whatever reason.
And we're talking about one closer. We're not talking about the whole bullpen or the whole starting pitching. We're just talking about one aspect.
Yes, but when you have a closer in that thing, when you're also baseball is one of those games where one-run games are the most important. Yeah, I think it's most important in baseball, arguably out of any other sports, that you win close games because certain times you're hitting depending on where you're playing, on who's pitching versus you. If you're versing a guy like for example, it's not the same era, but when the Yankees were versing Smoltz and they were versing Glavine in those World Series versus the Braves, they needed to know that they could have a guy in the ninth inning that was going to finish them off, so they could be in a 2-1 game. That's what I think is really, really important when you're playing versus a guy who you know is a great pitcher, or because obviously when you're playing in the World Series, all these guys pitching are going to be phenomenal. Okay, and so when you're in a World Series and they have great pitching staffs, you're only going to be scoring 2-3 runs a game. So that you need to know you have that closer to win those tight games. It's a little bit different when you're playing it's a little bit different when you're playing in the NBA when it's you could have a game decided by 2 points and you need a pitcher to shoot and you need a guy to make the last shot. It's a little bit different in the NBA in terms of that because certain guys the defense could be stingy, but they could have certain players that could really outweigh the defense. In the MLB, good pitching is going to be good hitting probably about 90% of the time. So when you have the closer and you know it's going to be 1-0 games and 2-1 games, it's so important that you have that last guy to be able to save the game.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with any of your points, but like that's just like I said, that's one aspect. Like there's so much more to baseball. There's so much more elements to win in baseball than just getting a guy out, getting the last 3 outs in a game. Like obviously it's important, like you said, like you have to rely on that one guy when you're up that you know he's going to close the deal. So you always have trust in Mariano. At the same time, there's so many elements that lead up to that one inning that could really paint a picture of how a whole game went, opposed to just 3 outs.
No,
Yeah,
I agree with you on that, but I'll get to Mark's point.
yeah. I mean, I agree. I think there's more to baseball than just the bottom of the ninth. Obviously, without that guy, you can't win. But I mean, I think there's a lot more factors to take into account than just the closer. And
No, I agree with you, but I think I think people kind of underrate the importance of the closer in baseball because I think that's the most important position in baseball, the closer. I feel very strongly about that. That's what separates a great team from a good team, whether they have that closer or the bullpen. Because when the Mets this year, for example, the Mets had a pretty good team. They had Alonso, they had all these guys that could hit, and they had a pretty decent pitching staff. When their bullpen was terrible, that's a team that really never ended up winning. Same thing with the Detroit Tigers in 2010 and in 2012. They had a great team too. They had Miguel Cabrera. They had great pitching too, but they didn't have the closer. They had Valverde who'd be blowing games, and it wouldn't give you an assurance that you were going to win all those games. That's what I think really separates great teams from good teams.
You could also look at the Washington Nationals this year. They had the starting rotation. They didn't have any semblance of a bullpen.
Well, they had Sean Doolittle. Wasn't he on the team, the closer?
He's like their only really reliever you could trust upon. And they used their starters throughout the whole playoffs in the bullpen, and they were able to find a way to win. But you're right, definitely right. Like if you look at this year's Mets or the 2015 Mets, they didn't win because of their bullpen. But you could also look on the flip side and look at teams that have won without their bullpen and have used their starters throughout.
I'm going to ask you this one time. Can you name me a position that's more important in baseball than the closer? Honestly. Like, could you say thoroughly that there is another position that's more important than the closer in baseball?
that's hard to argue.
Hard to argue.
Like, I don't think there's another position that's has the utmost premium as baseball. Because you see a team like Mike Trout. Mike Trout is 100% the greatest player I've ever seen in this era. But just because the Angels have the greatest player ever doesn't mean they can really win because they didn't surround them with pieces as well.
Well, they tried the Albert Pujols experiment, but it failed.
They tried that too, yeah. Well, he was about 100. But, like, I think the most important player in a baseball dynasty is the closer. But that's just my opinion.
I'm not going to disagree, but like I'm going to stick to the point where there's so many factors that lead up to your bullpen. Like if you don't have the talent to even get to the ninth inning, it doesn't matter what your closer can do.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That's true. But you got to figure you're also going to be in a lot of tight games. You got to figure the games you're going to win are going to be one-run games. You're not going to win every game 10-1. You're not going to win every game 4-0. You're going to be in pretty much when every team is so close in the MLB. Okay? You're going to be playing most of your games going to be one-run games, honestly. When you're playing divisional games, when the Yankees are playing Boston, when they're playing Tampa Bay, these are teams that have great pitching staffs. You need to be able to have that closer to seal the game.
Yeah, I mean, we're not disagreeing. We're just looking at different angles of the argument. Like,
Yeah.
the specific angle is that Mariano and those specific years where the Yankees were contenders, they were always in those close games and those scenarios where you knew Mariano was going to close. But there's also other teams that didn't even have to come down to the closer for them to win, and they just won because they had a huge lead or they just could pull it off in the end.
Well, but even with the Mets in 2015, right? I mean, I think if you look back at that Dodgers series, they threw. I think in that Game 5, they threw DeGrom.
Syndergaard pitched like 2-3 innings or almost.
Yeah, he pitched late too, and I think because their bullpen, obviously Familia was that's when he was at his peak, I think, and who knows, maybe this year he'll come back, he'll have a good year, but I think. Going back to, those years, it was the starters and then it was pretty much Familia. And they threw Syndergaard in that do or die situation and he came through. So, I mean, there are teams who've got a depth of starters and in a do or die situation, season on the line, they're not afraid to throw the starter in the bullpen.
Look at the Nationals this year. Who do they have to trust? Who do they have to put in a high leverage situation in the eighth or ninth inning or an extra innings to win them the game. It was either Scherzer or Strasburg. They didn't even use they only used Doolittle or the starters. They used Tanner Rainey a couple times, but besides those two bullpen pitchers, they used their starters throughout the whole time, even in extra innings or the eighth and ninth inning.
Right, and pre-Bryce Harper, what were the Nationals built around? Pitching. They Strasburg, Gonzalez, and then they brought in Scherzer, and then I think they had a couple other guys who could really throw.
I mean,
I don't know what
just going off the Mariano Rivera point, I don't think you're ever going to see another player like Mariano Rivera because you have all these guys. Chapman throws 100, whatever, and he has a great slider, and he gets hit. I got to tell you, for a guy who throws really that hard, and for a guy who everyone says has the stuff, he gets hit a lot. I mean, I'm not confident going into the ninth inning that I'm not always confident in that the ninth inning that Chapman's going to close the game. I don't know if you guys disagree with me on that, but if you look at actually how much he gets hit a lot, Chapman gets hit a lot. Mariano Rivera, when he ever got hit, it was a shock. Like, it was a 1 in 20 chance he was going to get hit. And he threw the same pitch every time. It's just amazing how dominant he was. Because there's never going to be another closer like Mariano Rivera, ever.
Despite the factor that, Chapman's hittable and, he's not invincible despite throwing 100, you also have to look at the aspect that he loses command a lot. And he has trouble finding the strike zone. And once he goes south, he goes way south.
I mean, that's the thing. Mariano Rivera with that cutter, you know the pinpoint control you have to be on a cutter? A cutter is supposed to move all over the place. And the fact that he had such pinpoint control with that pitch is something we're never going to see again. Because these guys with knuckleballs, they're all crazy. They have command issues. R.A. Dickey, Tim Wakefield, a lot of those guys have a lot of command issues with their knuckleball. Mariano Rivera's pitch, the cutter, is the greatest pitch ever because it was so unhittable and the command was so amazing.
I think if you look back though, I think Chapman had a really good postseason though with the Cubs in 2016.
No, he did. But you don't come up. Chapman it's unbelievable. He's not one of those guys where you come in and you say, "Boy, the game's over." I don't see that with Chapman. I don't.
That because it's the way how hard he throws his velocity, but he's not invincible. You've seen him at times lose his command, and he's giving up big hits like he did to Rajai Davis.
I know.
That game 7.
Yeah. Yep.
So we're gonna move on to another topic. We're gonna move on to the best player to never win a ring in esports. So I'm gonna give my 4 guys. I'm gonna go with Ken Griffey Jr. from the MLB. I'm gonna go with Barry Sanders from the NFL. I'm gonna say Allen Iverson from the NBA. That's a popular one actually. Some people might disagree with that one. Allen Iverson from the NBA, and I'm gonna give one from the NHL that I think people are gonna be intrigued about too. Joe Thornton from the Sharks. So what are your top 4 guys from each sport?
For me, I'm gonna go Dan Marino for football. For basketball, I'm gonna say John Stockton, or Allen Iverson's a good one too. So if one or the other. For NHL, I would say Henrik Lundqvist, and for what was the last one? Baseball.
Yeah,
I was going to Griffey too. We can't say Mike Trout yet because there's so many years left. But if he doesn't end up winning one, Mike Trout.
Mark, what are your top 4?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a New York twist here. So I'm gonna go football. I'm gonna go Dan Marino. I completely agree with Justin. Dan Marino had an amazing career and deserved to win a ring. Basketball, I'm going to go Patrick Ewing. Those 90s Knicks teams were unbelievable. But you can also say Reggie Miller too, right? I don't
Reggie
think
Miller's a good one.
Yeah. Those two in the 90s, they would go toe-to-toe, and both never won, so both are deserving. NHL, I'm going to go Lundqvist. He is so deserving of winning one. He came so close, but a couple overtime goals just unfortunately never came through for him. And then I'm going to go baseball. I'm going to go Mike Piazza. I think the Mets, he was not only the greatest all-time hitting catcher, but the Mets obviously ran into the beast of the Yankees in 2000 and had the Mets maybe in 1999 or a different year, built a team with a little bit more, stuff and a little bit more, swagger, maybe they would have came through. But Mike Piazza was definitely a deserving one. Oh, and also mention David Wright. David Wright definitely deserved one too.
All right, so I'm going to go – I know you guys both picked Marino, so I'm going to say why I picked Sanders. I think Sanders personally was the most dynamic, most talented player ever to be on the NFL field, honestly. I think there's never going to be another running back like Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders made plays that when with the in the Kingdom in Detroit that other guys we've never seen to this day. And he was going to break Emmitt Smith's rushing record if he kept playing. Because Barry Sanders is the most dominant running back ever. He may not be Jim Brown, but if he's not Jim Brown, he's probably number 2. Like, the one thing I'll say about these guys and the quarterbacks, you never think of a quarterback as being really flashy. Like, the greatest quarterbacks ever, Brady, Favre, Elway, Montana, Marino, none of those guys are really flashy. Barry Sanders' level of athleticism and the ability to make guys miss on a field is something we've never seen. Maybe another guy, the only other example I could really think of in terms of running back who made guys miss just as much as Barry Sanders, maybe would be Marcus Allen of the Raiders, back that I can think of. But there's never been another player like Barry Sanders ever to be on a football field, ever. You're never going to see it. He's the greatest running back that we've ever seen. And I'm trying to think of a running back that I've seen that even emulates Barry Sanders. I can't even think of one. Maybe Adrian Peterson, maybe when he was in his prime. But, I mean, you can't compare Adrian Peterson to Barry Sanders. You just can't. You absolutely cannot.
I agree with you, Hayden. I think football's hard to compare because it's 2 different eras and the game evolves so much. I feel like for any sport where the game evolves with speed and power, it's really hard to compare a running back from modern day, right, to Barry Sanders, who played in like the late 80s and
he played in the little bit of the late 80s and most of the 90s.
Right. So, like, that's a different era of football to a degree, no? I mean, like –
No, yeah, a little bit.
It's not, obviously football today with everything that goes on with that, it's definitely, I agree, it's hard to compare. Both were obviously so great at their position.
And why I picked Allen Iverson is Allen Iverson is probably the greatest pure scorer, I think, in the history of the NBA. Like, there's probably not another guy, maybe Durant. I'll give you Durant or Kobe, but there's not really another guy I've seen personally that really excited you like Allen Iverson did, the truth. And that crossover versus Tyronn Lue in the 2001 NBA Finals was just, when he just stepped over him, was unbelievable. And it wasn't like Allen Iverson was a big guy either. Allen Iverson was small, but just the quickness and the athleticism Allen Iverson had was unlike any other we've ever seen too. So that's why I pick Allen Iverson to the NBA.
I think another 2 that we didn't mention, but that could definitely be up there, is Randy Moss and CP3.
Oh, yeah. Randy Moss, 100%. I was considering picking Randy Moss. Randy Moss was also on probably the 2 greatest NFL teams to never win a Super Bowl. He had the 98 Vikings with Randall Cunningham, Randy Moss, and Chris Carter. That was one of the greatest teams ever. And then he was on the 2007 Patriots. So he went on 2 teams that had a regular season record of 31-1 and never won a championship. That's just unbelievable to me that he was on two of the greatest NFL teams to never win.
Yeah, definitely Randy Moss. And one of my other ones was CP3. I mean, all those years with the Clippers where he made the play. I mean, I know with the Hornets he didn't have much success because of the team around him. But with the Clippers, all those years, they can never break through. Like, whether you think they could get over the hump, an injury would happen, or someone else would underperform. But it was
that was when they lost to the Warriors. That was their year to win, 100%. When then he got hurt, and that's really changed the dynamic of the series.
That was their year to win.
That was their year to win. That's a year I think they should have won that year.
6 at home, and Durant was hurt, right? I think.
Yeah, Durant was hurt. No. Durant was hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it was one of the years before. It might have been the year before, but yeah, like the ball's in your court. Game 6, like you have Harden.
And then in Game 7, they went like I think they shot about 20% from the 3-point line. They just kept hooking up threes, and they just couldn't hit them.
I think that's what ultimately hurt them. They just live and died by the 3, and they didn't play good enough defense to win.
Well, yeah. What do you guys think of Joe Thornton as the greatest NHL player to never win? That's who I picked. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's a good pick. I mean, the guy came close multiple times. I mean, the Sharks have had really good teams. I think the year they played Pittsburgh in the final, I think Crosby needed to pretty much come out with a statement and say, this is why I'm the greatest player of this generation, or, this is why I'm going to have the most, or I'm going to have tied for the most cups of anybody in this generation. I think Joe Thornton has over 1,000 NHL games played. I don't even know how many goals he has, but it's a good number. It's a healthy number. And those Sharks teams could have definitely won a championship, but the West was dominated by Detroit, for most of those years. And
You had the
then,
Blackhawks for a little bit.
yeah, Detroit, Chicago, and Vancouver that one year. And then they ran into the Kings, I think, a couple times
Yep,
too.
they ran into the Kings with Jonathan Quick and that
Yeah.
team.
So I think that's a solid choice. I think Joe Thornton just doesn't get enough attention because he plays in San Jose, quite frankly. But yeah, that's a good choice.
All right, guys. So that's the end of part 1 for Settle the Score. We're going to come back to you in part 2, and I'm going to regroup. So thank you for sticking with us for part 1, and we'll be back in a little bit shortly for part 2.